Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. What you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's not part of a movie or a Netflix documentary. These are real courtroom statements delivered under oath in the ongoing federal trial that's exposing the darkest corners of Hollywood's elite. At the center of it all, Sean Diddy Combs. But no one, not even seasoned court reporters, could have predicted what happened next. Because when the doors opened, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson walked in. There were no flashing cameras, no press leaks, no fanfare. Just a global icon stripped of everything but his voice, stepping forward to reveal something he had kept buried for over 20 years. What he described wasn't just shocking, it was terrifying. It exposed a system built not on talent or ambition, but on fear, humiliation, and absolute control. And once he spoke, there was no going back. Courtrooms have a rhythm, a pulse, but that day it skipped a beat. The judge was mid-session when a quiet knock at the side entrance interrupted the flow. The door opened and every head turned. The man who entered wasn't the polished celebrity known for his charm and motivational speeches. This version of Dwayne Johnson looked different. Hollow, rigid, worn down. He didn't flash a smile. He didn't nod at the familiar faces in the gallery. He simply walked toward the witness stand, as if every step was carrying the weight of 2 decades of silence. Even Diddy seemed momentarily thrown. His legal team leaned in, whispering rapidly, clearly caught off guard. No one had prepared for this witness. No one had even known he was coming. And yet, there he was. He raised his hand, was sworn in, and took a deep breath. What followed would rattle the entertainment world to its core. Dwayne Johnson didn't come to testify out of revenge. He made that clear. This wasn't about getting even. It was about breaking a cycle. What he carried was a story that stretched back to the beginning of his acting career, when Hollywood had just started to open its golden doors. At the time, he was full of fire, ambition, and trust. Trust that the people helping him rise were doing it for the right reasons. But behind those doors, he said, was something much darker. The invitations began slowly. First, it was dinners with producers, directors, and executives, always hosted by Diddy. They were elegant, sophisticated, seemingly harmless, until they weren't. Because the deeper he was brought in, the more the tone shifted. Conversations turned cryptic. Gatherings got smaller, stranger. The rules stopped making sense. He was asked to show up at obscure hours, 2:13 a.m. for a meeting, told to arrive alone. Phones off, no entourage, no questions. The message was clear: if you wanted access, you had to play by rules no one explained. There was one night he would never forget. It began with a car ride to a private estate just outside Los Angeles. He wasn't told where they were going. His driver didn't speak. Just music, turned up too loud. When they arrived, the house was completely dark except for the glow of red lanterns near the floor. The air smelled like smoke and oil. Inside, a long table sat surrounded by 5 men in suits. Silent, waiting. At the head of the table, Diddy. The only sound in the room came from hidden speakers, an audio loop repeating a question over and over: "Are you worthy?" Then the tray was brought out, covered in a silver lid, slowly lifted. What sat underneath wasn't food, not really. It was a test. Pieces of raw monkey brain, still steaming, no words, no instructions, just pressure. One of the men pointed toward Dwayne. He had a choice, but not really. The door behind him was already locked. What happened next wasn't about food. It was about submission. What Dwayne endured that night wasn't just disgusting, it was a ritual. A psychological breaking point designed to force compliance. No cameras, no contracts, just humiliation disguised as opportunity. And when it was over, when the final bite was taken, Diddy reportedly stood up and simply said, "Welcome to level 2." For years, Dwayne kept that memory buried. He convinced himself it had been some strange industry hazing. A one-time ordeal, but it wasn't. That night marked a turning point. Because after that, everything changed. After that night, the world didn't change. But Dwayne did. He returned to his routine: interviews, rehearsals, set calls. But something inside him had shifted. He couldn't unsee what had happened, couldn't unfeel what it meant. And the strangest part? His phone started ringing more. new film offers, meetings with directors he hadn't even auditioned for. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of him. But none of the offers came with questions about his talent. No one mentioned scripts, performance, or screen presence. Instead, they said things like, "We hear you're someone who plays the game." It was subtle, but he understood. These weren't opportunities, they were assignments. And then came the next phase. Dwayne was invited to a private desert retreat, pitched as an exclusive wellness getaway for high-profile entertainers. He was told it would be a few days of mental clarity, no phones, no noise, just peace. But when he arrived, what he found was anything but peaceful. Guests were separated immediately. Phones were taken. Windows were blacked out. There were no schedules. Music played on a constant loop through hidden speakers. Food was served at strange hours and no one knew who was running the operation. It felt like a psychological experiment. Each person was given a notebook filled with phrases they were told to recite daily. "I surrender to power." "Success requires sacrifice." "Fear is weakness." "Silence is strength." They weren't allowed to speak freely, only when spoken to. Cameras were never seen, but somehow they knew they were being watched. It wasn't wellness, it was programming. When he came back to Hollywood, Dwayne tried to shake it off. He poured himself into work, kept smiling on red carpets, shouted slogans on Instagram, told fans to keep pushing. But he knew now none of this was random. He was being monitored. He noticed small things. When he declined an invitation to a private party, a project he was attached to suddenly fell through. When he asked for changes in a contract, calls stopped coming. When he pushed back on endorsements, he was told, "This isn't the time to ruffle feathers." Everyone around him, agents, managers, lawyers, seemed to know where the invisible lines were. They never named names. They just whispered warnings. The message was always the same. Don't disrupt the system. Dwayne began to understand. Diddy wasn't just a music mogul, he was a gatekeeper, a broker of silence. His influence stretched far beyond studios or record labels. It reached into contracts, brands, institutions, and reputations. He didn't need to threaten anyone directly. He just made sure the doors stayed open or slammed shut. And everyone knew it. There was one event that shattered any remaining illusion. Dwayne had been invited to what was described as a private industry screening in the Hollywood Hills. Nothing unusual except the security was heavier. Phones were taken at the door, guests were handed black masks, not for theatrics, but to protect anonymity. Inside, the mood was off. Too quiet, too rehearsed. He walked through the halls observing actors he respected behaving like shadows of themselves. Nervous laughter, forced smiles, eyes darting. And then, down a dim corridor, he saw a young actor, barely in his 20s, sitting alone, shaking, clutching a drink like it was the only thing grounding him. Dwayne asked if he was okay. The boy didn't answer at first. Then finally, barely above a whisper, he said, "They told me this is what it takes." That moment stayed with Dwayne, more than the rituals, more than the retreat, because in that young man's face, he saw himself, the version of him from 20 years ago, before the manipulation, before the silence. It was the moment he realized he couldn't keep pretending. Leaving that party didn't free him. If anything, it weighed heavier. He began losing sleep, pulled away from public events, questioned who he could trust. Even when surrounded by people, he felt alone, because he was carrying a truth no one wanted to hear. And worse, a truth no one wanted to say first. He started documenting everything, dates, names, locations, not for revenge, but to remind himself that it happened, that he wasn't imagining it, that he wasn't losing his mind. Then came the headlines. Cassie Ventura, lawsuits, allegations, people stepping forward little by little, whispers turning into testimonies. And Dwayne knew it was time. This wasn't about one night anymore, or one man. It was about a system that thrived on complicity, a machine that chewed up ambition and spat out obedience. So when the prosecution reached out and asked if he was willing to testify, he said yes. And then the silence broke. On the stand, Dwayne didn't raise his voice. He didn't shake. He didn't perform. He simply looked across the courtroom and stared directly at Diddy. The room went quiet. No one moved. Even the judge remained still. And then, in the calmest voice he could muster, Dwayne said, "You made me believe I had to destroy myself to succeed. That obedience was the only path to greatness. And for a while, I believed you." There was no anger in his tone, just finality. But that wasn't power. That was fear. That was control disguised as opportunity. Diddy didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, everyone understood. The silence had protected the wrong people for far too long. As Dwayne stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom didn't erupt in applause. There was no dramatic outburst, just a heavy, sacred stillness. He walked toward the exit, but stopped just before the door. Turning back, he looked not at the judge, nor the attorneys, nor Diddy. He looked at the gallery, the onlookers, the victims, the survivors. And he said, "This isn't just my story, it's theirs. It's the story of every person who was told to be quiet, who was told this was normal, who was made to believe they were crazy for questioning it." He took a breath. Hollywood has been built on a lie. That success justifies everything. That silence equals safety. That power can't be challenged, but today, that lie breaks. And with that, he left. Not as The Rock, not as a brand, but as a man who refused to stay quiet any longer. Dwayne Johnson's testimony didn't end in the courtroom. It echoed far beyond those walls. Within hours, reporters scrambled to confirm what had just unfolded. News outlets ran headlines hinting at the story, but few dared publish the full details. Too dangerous, too raw, too real. Whispers spread across studios and talent agencies like wildfire. He actually said it. He named names. He described the ritual. The silence had been cracked, and everyone in Hollywood knew it. Some dismissed it as a publicity stunt. Others claimed he was exaggerating. But for those who had been close to the shadows, those who had lived on the edge of that inner circle, the words weren't shocking. They were confirmation. Dwayne wasn't the first to speak. Monique, years earlier, had hinted at something buried beneath the glamour. A system that punished truth-tellers and rewarded silence. At the time, many dismissed her as difficult or bitter. But after Dwayne's testimony, people began revisiting her interviews with new eyes, listening differently. Then came rumors of Jamie Foxx's near-death incident, once blamed on vague health complications. Suddenly, those complications felt less medical and more political. Some speculated he had seen too much, known too much, or pushed back at the wrong time. And like many before him, he was reminded who held the strings. Behind closed doors, producers and executives referred to it with a single phrase: the trials. It was never publicly documented. There was no paper trail, but the stories matched too closely to be coincidence. Rising stars invited to industry retreats, strange rituals, conditioning disguised as mentorship, a hidden network of power brokers that operated like a cult, not a business. One former bodyguard, speaking anonymously, claimed he had driven 3 separate entertainers to the same blacked-out mansion Dwayne described. Each one exited the vehicle in silence. Each one returned looking hollow. Others described music artists being fast-tracked to stardom after disappearing for weeks without explanation. Agents warned new clients subtly, "Don't ask questions about Diddy's private events. Just be grateful you're invited." It wasn't about talent, it never was. It was about submission, about control. And those who resisted? They didn't get blacklisted outright. They were erased gradually, slowly. Their names stopped showing up on casting shortlists. Their albums were delayed without explanation. Their managers moved on. No scandal, no warning, just silence. The punishment was erasure. Dwayne's testimony pulled back the curtain, but it also set fire to the foundation. Within a week, legal teams for several music and film figures contacted the court anonymously, requesting information on witness protections. A handful of names leaked, mostly smaller artists, some crew members, even assistants. None of them famous, but all of them terrified. Online, the conversation exploded. Reddit threads compiled rumored stories. TikTok speculated on masked parties and silent contracts. Former insiders began speaking carefully, indirectly, about things they'd seen but never questioned. One entertainment journalist wrote, "This isn't about one man, it's about a structure that made monsters untouchable, a system that convinced people it was all part of the game." And Dwayne, he vanished. No press tour, no follow-up interview, no public statement. Because for him, this wasn't about fame, it wasn't about a headline, it was about healing. Truth doesn't just liberate, it wounds. Dwayne Johnson's silence had protected his career, but speaking had cost him control. In the weeks following his testimony, several of his endorsements went on pause. Studios delayed projects quietly, citing logistical challenges. Some executives went radio silent, others politely withdrew from pending deals. And yet, he didn't flinch. Because what he had said on that stand had already cost him far more. He spoke of sleepless nights, of paranoia, of questioning whether every smile he saw was real or rehearsed. He had built a brand around positivity and motivation, but beneath it was a man who had been gaslit into believing he owed his success to submission. He didn't name every detail in open court, but the message was clear. This wasn't about canceling anyone. It was about ending a cycle. The price of silence was his peace. And now he wanted it back. As the trial continued, the prosecution hinted that more witnesses might follow, more testimonies, more cracks in the illusion. Some celebrities began distancing themselves from Diddy. Old friends avoided questions, collaborators deleted photos, others posted vague captions about protecting your energy and cleansing circles. Behind the scenes, however, fear grew. Because if Dwayne Johnson, a man with everything to lose, was willing to speak, who would be next? Diddy's lawyers worked overtime, filing motions, demanding suppression of certain testimonies. But the damage was already done. The court of public opinion had seen too much. And while no one said it aloud, everyone wondered how many of Hollywood's most beloved names had been through the same doors. How many had been asked to do the unthinkable? And how many had said yes? Hollywood has always sold the same story, that success is earned, that talent rises, that the game is fair. But Dwayne Johnson's testimony tore through that illusion like a wrecking ball. It wasn't just about Diddy. It wasn't even just about rituals or hidden contracts. It was about a machine that thrives on silence, on fear, on control. The courtroom may have gone quiet the moment Dwayne stepped down, but the world didn't. Because his words hit a nerve, not just in the industry, but in every viewer who has ever wondered why their favorite artist disappeared, why certain stars suddenly faded, why so many whispered but never screamed. What Dwayne revealed wasn't just a scandal, it was a system. And once exposed, systems don't just recover, they collapse, or they adapt in secret. And as for Dwayne, he may never star in another billion-dollar franchise again. He may never headline another global press tour. But what he did that day was bigger than any box office number. He took back his story. Not the character, not the brand, the man. And now, the world has to decide what to do with that truth. If this story shocked you, if it made you question everything you thought you knew, then don't scroll away. Subscribe to this channel for more unfiltered, long-form breakdowns of the testimonies that the media won't air. Hit the like button if you believe Dwayne's voice matters. Comment below, do you think more names will come forward? Or is Hollywood already trying to bury the truth again? And remember, silence protects the powerful. But truth? Truth changes everything.